Welcome to Charts Today European Opening. My name is David Linton, and today's edition for Friday the 16th of November comes to you from London. And we start by looking at the dollar index. Dollar actually pushing higher again this morning. Still just slightly bearish on the short-term chart, but the long-term charts having hit that 17-month high earlier in the week. Still pretty bullish. Euro is slightly bullish on the short-term chart, but again, medium and long-term bearish. If we see new lows below that 112 level, that activates 107, so that's quite scary if we do put in new lows. Looking at the Japanese yen, we're seeing the dollar is weaker here, so it gives us a little bit of heads up that dollar is just weak in the short term. Sterling tumbled yesterday, of course, on the multiple resignations of UK ministers and Brexit fears, and so we are just seeing sterling bearish, but against all three time frames. It's steadied this morning, but still looking quite worrying. And we've got this downside target now to 122 against the dollar, which is 4.5% lower. Looking against the euro, sterling was also lower here, having collapsed yesterday, and again we're steady. No clear downside targets on the short-term chart, but there's no denying the picture is still pretty bearish. Against the Swiss franc we tumbled. We've got a target to 126, which is 2.3% lower. And against the Aussie dollar we really tumbled yesterday, and we were down at 2% at one stage. Bitcoin's up 1% this morning, having fallen 10% the day before yesterday. So we really are seeing it just entering more and more bearish territory, and the long-term chart now really breaking down. So it's pretty bad news for Bitcoin. We've got targets 18 and 19% lower. Looking at the US market, it recovered quite strongly in the end last night. S&P was up 1%. We see the Nasdaq is still bearish short term, and the Dow also up just under 1%. Might be finding some short-term support here, and maybe even some medium-term support with the lagging line there. So it's too early to call a recovery of the market, but it is looking a little bit better. The Russell 2000 also still bearish in the short term. The S&P future is down 0.2% and still bearish. And more worrying still, the Nasdaq E-mini is down 2/3% and still bearish. So it does look like the US market is going to open lower, reversing some of those gains we saw yesterday. Looking in the UK, we see the FTSE is up 0.75% this morning. More than 3/4 of the earnings of FTSE 100 companies come from abroad, so it's not surprising that when we see the pound dive like it did yesterday, that has a knock-on impact for UK blue chip companies that have most of their earnings in foreign currency. Having said that, of course, the valuations of these companies, while rising, effectively undone by the weaker pound for foreign investors. Looking at the mid caps, we see that's pretty bearish as well. And the DAX on the short-term chart, even though we're up this morning, and the DAX is still bearish short-term, although we're up 0.75%. But the trends are all broken here, and it's hard to see how the markets are going to recover with those new downtrends. And the same is true of the CAC 40. Not quite bearish yet on the long-term chart, but the French stocks are still looking bearish on that short term. Tokyo is down 0.5%. Hang Seng was up 1/3%, and China up 0.4%. Actually, just bucking the trend a little bit lately. China is actually looking a little bit better on the short term, but of course, the medium and long term charts are dire with very scary downside targets and those 4-year lows that we've seen this last several weeks. The Sensex is actually up 0.5%, so that's looking stronger, and the Aussie market just slightly down. Brent Crude is up 1.5% this morning. Not enough to take it bullish, but it is on the short-term chart, but it is stabilizing, but still quite worrying. We do have this target of $60, which has been in place for quite some time on the 0.5% chart. Looking at WTI, we see also trying to recover, but not yet through the cloud either. We do have some relief targets, but they're pretty unimpressive. If we make new lows on WTI, that's going to be very scary. We have probably just moved to long-term support. Looking at the point and figure chart here and the Ichimoku chart, the weekly, we are right on support. So it may well be that we are going to find support here. US Nat Gas has pulled right back to $4. Huge volatility in the gas price we've seen the last few days. We're up nearly at $5, we're at $4.93, and now we're back at $4.04. But having said that, we were only a few weeks ago at $3. So gas prices have really moved very significantly indeed. Gold is up 1/3% and bullish on the short-term chart. We've now activated this upside target at $1,242, sorry. So we do see 2% upside on the short term and 4% on the medium term. So it does look good. The silver price doing similar, not quite as bullish on the medium term chart, and the long term chart not great either, with quite big downside targets. US 10-year yields sitting fairly steady at 3.11%. So we are still just slightly bearish there on the short term, but yields are rising slightly in Europe this morning, and we're seeing German bonds, the bonds actually rising, the yields actually, bonds have been falling, yields rising, but even so, we're still very bearish for bond prices in Europe. That data was all coming from Thomson Reuters Icon, or if you're a private user, Metastock Zenith. So here we are now looking at the data coming in from Yahoo Finance. So first of all, world indices, we see here the US indices were all pretty strong last night. The Nasdaq up 1.8% almost. We're seeing this morning that in Europe we're opening quite well. The Euro Stoxx up 0.7%, so it's quite strong there as well. And in Asia, a bit of a mixed picture, but mostly up in the Far East. So looking at the Aussie market, we've got some pretty big performances here. Costa Group up 11%, Afterpay up 10%. And if we look to the worst performers, CYBG down 8% is the big faller in Oz at the moment in the ASX 200. Looking at the Nifty, we're seeing here Bharti Airtel up 6%, so that's looking pretty good, although the chart's still looking pretty bearish. You can see all these prices all coming in from Yahoo Finance. HCL Technologies 2.2%, and if we look the other way, Yes Bank really has been a struggle lately, back down another 8% this morning. Indian Bull Housing down 5%. So we're seeing still some pretty big falls there. China, mostly, well, we saw the index was up. We've got Shenzhen Securities up 8.8%, but mostly bullish, and we're seeing the rises outweighing the fallers in terms of percentages. If we look at Hong Kong, similarly, we've got some BOC Hong Kong holdings up 2%, but the chart still looks terrible. So we're noticing this where a lot of these charts just look terrible, but the price, we're seeing these counter relief moves. Japan also up quite strongly, Sumitomo up 4.8%, massively outperforming the Dow Jones Index, and so here we are seeing a case of a strong performer continuing to perform strongly, so that's looking good as well. Taking a look at Europe, we've got, we're just looking at the Nasdaq stocks last night. JD was the performer, but just looking at some of the big names, Alphabet was up 2%, so Google doing well there. Amazon up 1.2%, still bearish, and this relative trend breaking down is really still very worrying against the Dow Jones. Looking at Apple, they recovered a little bit, up 2.4%, but I fear Apple now are in that bearish territory on the medium-term chart, with downside targets of anywhere between 3 and 12% there for Apple. We've gone from an outperformance of 25% to 6% in the last couple of weeks, so we really have unwound a lot of this year's move. Facebook was lower, and showing its inherent weakness, bearish on all three time frames. Facebook has now underperformed the market by 24% this year. I wouldn't have believed I would be saying that, but it's underperformed the Dow Jones by 24%. Looking at Microsoft, up 2.2%, and a quick look at Netflix, up 1.1%, and Tesla were up 1.3%. Still one of the better looking stocks, having bucked the trend. Looking in Europe this morning, we just grouped the UK stocks by percentage performance. House builders were down in a big way yesterday on that Brexit fears, worrying about the effect on housing and finance. We did see banks and home builders hit. Taylor Wimpey's actually up this morning by 2.8%, but it doesn't change the chart. Looks pretty bearish. And looking at the top performers, there's many more outperforming. Yesterday it was commodity stocks, seeing some of these coming back, but today we've got AstraZeneca down 1%, Royal Mail down further after their poor results yesterday. The fact they're making new lows after these price dives is very worrying on that chart. Looking at the 250, again just ranking by performance. Again, this data all coming by Yahoo. We're seeing a bit of a relief rally in Capita this morning after its massive 11% fall yesterday. And if we look at the poorer performers, we've got Contour Global, Energen down 3%. So Energen actually looking quite nice as a chart there. So it's really outperformed this year. So looking pretty strong. And then looking at the Euro stocks, just on the 600, we're seeing NIB is up 6.6%. Bearish short term, but still the long term chart looking pretty good. Vivendi up 4.5%. And just a quick look at the fallers in Europe, we've got Barry Callebaut down 3.5%, although that chart is still looking pretty bullish. That's it for today. Until Monday, happy charting. See you then.